Welcome, my friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge. Smoke Camels for 30 days and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. Well, my friends, it's been another week of very bad news. You remember when you could actually listen to the news? I remember those days. We'd be making dinner together in the kitchen listening to NPR. You can't do that anymore. Every once in a while, I will hear Karen cry out, "Oh my God, oh my God!" And I'll say, "Well, what's going on?" She says, "Matt Gaetz is going to be the new AG." And I smile and say, "That's a perfect choice." And she says, "He won't be able to get through though, through the Senate." And I say, "Yeah, sure he will." The election was a tipping point. We are now in a new reality, which has yet to be really stabilized. One side has been emboldened and the other side devastated. I've repeated many times on this show, in fact, it is a sort of mantra here, that we are witnessing the collapse of our civilization and the extinction of our species. I could have emphasized that we are witnessing the most dramatic mass extinction event in history of the planet, but I like to keep things focused on our selfish little selves. I'm reading Philippe Sands' masterful classic, yeah, Lawless World. This is he's the author of this is 2016. This is 2005. He's an expert on genocide, and so this is the Lawless World. The America and the making and breaking of global rules, from FDR's Atlantic Charter to George W. Bush's illegal war. It's what can I say? Some people have an expansive idea of what a book title ought to be. So this is gives you an idea of what the book is about. It's just from the blurb. 60 years ago, the United States and Great Britain spearheaded efforts to create a new world order based on international rules. The Atlantic Charter, signed in 1941, was soon followed by the UN Charter, Nuremberg Charter, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Convention, the Genocide Convention, the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, the World Bank. And together they launched a new international rule of law on a breathtaking journey, leading directly to Augusto Pinochet's incarceration in London, international criminal trials in the Balkans, Rwanda, and Darfur, and new rules for global economic liberalization. Today, these same two nations are leading the charge to abandon many of the global safeguards that they once fought to establish. In 2005, George Bush appointed an attorney general closely associated with the legalization of torture and nominated a UN ambassador who believes that there is no such thing as international law. How has this come to be? That is the question that leading international lawyer Philippe Sands answers in this eye-opening book. We are told that Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib are the work of rogues in a lawful and humane system. But they are, in fact, the products of a 30-year assault on the rule of law. Sands shows us step by step how, as human rights prove to be inconvenient in the face of global economic forces, we reach this dreadful state in which the rules are selectively applied. Some of the problems date back to the Carter and Reagan eras, but the events of the past 5 years have given the assault on global rules unprecedented vigor. Using the attacks of September 11th and the subsequent war on terror as justification, the Bush administration has decided to remake the global order and to turn its back on international agreements governing basic human rights, war, torture, and the environment. With Tony Blair often colluding, the end is nowhere in sight. Lawless World is both an expose of an indictment of a catastrophic realignment of the laws that govern international affairs, and it is a vivid and human account of the reckless way America has reneged on its very founding documents, and a call for us to recognize the role that we should be playing to reassert law and with it a stable and secure world. Uh, let me just review the 20th century for you very quickly. Now, the 20th century started with World War I and descended quickly into the Great Depression, which leads directly to World War II. The Cold War followed immediately after World War II. The collapse of the Soviet Empire leads directly to the global war on terrorism. Welcome to the 21st century. Folks, we barely survived the 20th century. Uh, Getting back to my point about the collapse of our civilization, we established an international order after World War II, and it was already collapsing by the time Nixon became president in 1970. And keep in mind that Nixon inaugurated the Southern strategy to attract Southern voters with appeals to racial fears. Lincoln was assassinated for inaugurating a multiracial polity. That dream collapsed with the failure of Reconstruction. The problem is that we think that history is a story of progress. History is not the story of progress. It is the story of the tragic history of a doomed species whose efforts to make sense of their own demise. With each tragedy, we devise short-term solutions. When 90% of the bats died, we upped the level of pesticides to control the pests, and that led to a substantial increase in infant mortality. Short-term solutions always create much more difficult long-term problems. My friends, if you accept my premise that we are witnessing the irreversible collapse of our civilization, you won't be surprised to see that not only our international order collapse, but the end of NATO, the end of the notion of universal rights. But we live in a world where 35 million children below the age of 5 are acutely malnourished. They are not expected to live. Those children are starving to death right now. They were starving to death before the election. And the orangutan are being driven to extinction so that the palm oil plantations can supply the cosmetics industry. I would remind you that the incoming regime will return the US to protectionist policies. Trump loves tariffs. After World War I, the US sustained the international economy by supplying loans to Germany so that the Germans could pay reparations to the French and the British, which allowed the French and the British to pay for the cost of the war back to the US. After World War I, the U.S. also turned protectionism, and when we stopped doing that, when the Great Depression began, and in 1931 we closed that down, and it really threw the world irrevocably into collapse, into economic collapse. After World War I, the U.S. also turned to protectionism, which stifled foreign trade, just as today the new administration will contract international trade further, destabilizing international relations. If you've been following me this far, you might be able to imagine the end of the Department of Education. Ronald Reagan wanted to dismantle it, but found it useful to keep it after the election. The Supreme Court has already undermined federal regulatory abilities with the Chevron ruling. In case you didn't know or understand that, over the past 40 years, federal agencies have been able to set regulatory policies relying on their own scientific and regulatory experts. The Supreme Court recently ruled that denied the courts their proper role in interpreting regulatory laws, and so they said that now these things should be decided by judges. So to have anxiety about our future means that you're aware of the general direction that we're headed in. I would urge you not to assign blame. By the time we realized that we were impacting our planet's climate, it was already too late. We passed the point of no return long before we realized what we were doing. I wish I had better tidings, but as I've said many times before, we don't sell hope here at More Bad News. We only sell camels. So until next week, stay human, stay safe. I'll probably be back next week with more bad news, but keep in mind, the global communications network that supports our civilization will collapse one day. I have already experienced the loss of my online archive. One day it was there and then it just disappeared. That is what will happen to YouTube and Facebook and the rest of our social media. It's all very fragile. So take care, my friends. Make every day count, and I'll be back next week with more bad news.